Good morning, everyone. We are here for a little off. We're on a Thursday instead of a Tuesday, but meeting with my dad to go over what's happening this week, what's happening in the country, and what's happening on the tour. So we're excited to get ready and get started. Last night we had a big team meeting, our internal team, and we were talking about updating some of our work. So you'll be seeing some changes coming, which we're excited about. Good morning, Dad. But we won't change this segment. My dad and I are enjoying talking. Hello.
Good morning.
Good morning.
How are
Are you
you?
in a car today?
Again,
No, I said, are you in a car today?
yes.
Yes. Where are you off to?
Actually, I'm sitting in the McDonald's parking lot because they have Wi-Fi, and it's a lot better than going LTE.
Yes,
So
I am at Starbucks doing the same, so I can definitely relate. And inside is packed, so we're outside today.
good. You
That,
were mentioning. I heard you mention about our team meeting last night, but I didn't hear what you said.
I just said that, we kind of had a powwow discussing kind of what's working, what we need to do to progress forward, and how we need to evolve. I didn't necessarily say what kind of the points were, but I can. Certainly, one of them was, to my excitement, is that the work that we're doing, I feel, is very value added to discussion. We have kind of held back a bit on launching it to press, launching it to everyone, because I wanted to make sure that we could really wrap our arms around this information and make it useful beyond what's already happening in politics. I mean, if you're just one
Good.
more person in the field, there's really no point. Uh,
Right.
Not only because we have a lot of people running, but also because I'm not a politician.
Right.
So unless you're going to be added in a substantial and different way, there's no point in us being here. But I feel really comfortable that we are, that the information we're bringing to the table is something no one has seen before. And so, that makes us come together as a team and say, all right, now how do we package this a little bit better, a little tighter, and start launching it to everyone? So
Yeah.
I think
I
we'll see some changes.
yeah. I thought everything went really well. I think we brought up across some bridges, like you said, as far as where we wanted to be and what we were doing. And I think it's really significant in what we're doing. Is the fact is that we're trying to take a lot of the politics out of this whole
Yeah.
what we're doing, and what you're striving for is a cohesive nation to sit down and actually make things happen rather than sit down and draw these lines in the sand regarding any issue and all that kind of stuff. So driving that forward is really paramount in our success in getting out and doing our things. So I'm real glad about that.
Yeah, I think government needs to be functional, not sensational. But
It's
elections
always been
are
sensational
sensational. I
though.
know. But it just doesn't need to be. And I think people if they pause for a moment, have to assume that government itself, the millions of people that work in government, are not spending every day in this heightened stress scenario. We just couldn't do it. That said, I did get official tweets when I was in government. Literally across
Yes.
my desk would come, this is the official tweet from today. And when they were defense oriented, we definitely got notified, which
Sure.
was an interesting experience, to say the least.
Right.
And it's difficult because the tweeting and the discussions that are happening are very, very toxic, and also it's not just that they're sensational; they are tapping into people's emotions, and so you can't ignore them, even though, quite honestly, that would typically be the smartest move. People who say the comments that are being discussed right now, of course, they're ridiculous.
Yeah,
I mean,
I
we're a
think
diverse nation. There's nowhere
uh,
going home to. We are home.
right.
Thank you.
I think, and actually that ties into our discussion today about terrorism and how terrorism works and where it goes and what it does, because it has really two different sides to it. It has a violent and nonviolent
Yes.
agenda.
So, yes.
I think your views, and I'm going to be asking you how you see all this, but I think that's their resolve is that they either their ideology is so skewed to normal life that they have to use violent means to get it across and try to use fear as their gas, as their gas in the engine to make it move. However, I think as a nation, I think we're doing as well as anybody else out there in curbing it, and I think it goes back to your stand regarding the 2.4 million federal workers that are out there. As much criticism as the Department of Justice gets on a regular daily basis, there's an extraordinary amount of excellent law enforcement agency people out there that are doing an absolutely spectacular job in protecting and making us safe. I mean, I still feel very safe walking down a street that I'm not going to be accosted by or blown up by or shot at by a terrorist group from a foreign nation.
Now, Dad, I want to pause you there just for a minute because I do need to give a voice to some of the people who don't feel as safe as you because they don't fit your demographic.
True.
And, you haven't walked in their shoes, nor have I.
No.
But there are a huge part of our nation right now is feeling like they aren't safe.
Yeah.
And that it is because of some of the division. And it has to be said. It doesn't need to be screamed, but it needs to be said so that we are listening and we are understanding that we've not walked in everyone's shoes. And there are many people of color in our nation who are very uncomfortable. And it isn't necessarily because of law enforcement, but it can be because it can be. There are some areas where it can be. It can be because of much of the politics that's happening right now. And some of it can also be fear-based. I do, you never want to, I do have to acknowledge, though, that there are also people who will use this to their advantage to sensationalize some of the fear and pain that people are having. I think we need to look at it realistically. We need to be honest. We need to listen. And when people are saying they don't feel safe because of the color of their skin or because of their background or their accent or the fact that they were born in a different country and came to this country, we are a land of immigrants. We are diverse. And that is to our advantage, not our disadvantage. We need to have those conversations in a calm, positive environment. I hope substantially, and I really do think this is the case, but we'll have to look at the data. Yes, there are loud voices right now that are saying negative things about a variety of individuals who do have different backgrounds than a white background. I hope they are in the minority. The people that I run into, boots on the ground, all around the cities, and I am talking to everyone, I'm not getting that same picture. I'm seeing it on TV. I feel the pain of, I cannot walk in the shoes of a minority race, but I can hear it and I can listen to it. But I am hearing a lot of compassion. I hope that is what resonates.
I'll even add to that two things. One, that's the other part of terrorism. There's also foreign terrorism and there's domestic terrorism. Yes. And we are unfortunately, we have both existing in our country, and it happens. Yeah. And certainly, I am making my statement about safety. No, I think it's been one of the black eyes of our country is that we're sitting down as a person of color or ethnicity or any of the the things that might separate you from me have become such a grand issue from a violent standpoint. Our history is checkered with making mistakes. I mean, I am not going to sit down and baptize us as being some kind of sainthood here. We're not a saint. We have made a lot of mistakes. I think one of the things in the growing pains, and I hope it continues in the experiment, is that time. It's been such a short period of time, really. When you think about the thousands of years going back to either the Far Eastern history or even European history. Our short-term life term here has been pretty small, and if we're recognizing even in our existence that we're seeing some of the big flaws that are within our society about inclusiveness and making sure that we tap into all the resources of our diversity, I think we're learning it. I don't think it's happened. I don't think it's moving as fast as we would like, only because we live in a short period of time. I mean, humans want to condense everything down to a 2-minute cycle, and they're happy about it. But
that was my lesson last night. Constantly,
yeah.
less. I know it's very hard because I want to explain and think about and really understand. Exactly. And you're right, Dad. We want it in a 2-minute snippet, and in doing so, it also, means that we look at the world in a 2-minute snippet, which means we look from our own perspective, and it is a necessity that we look from other perspectives. And I don't mean that just on the basis of if you're a good person, then you would look at it this way. No, that is not what I'm saying. Although I do hope everyone is interested to hear about other people. But the truth is, from a national readiness perspective, the number one asset we have is this diversity. When people bring different ideas to the table because they've had an experience different than mine, it's worthy of being heard. When they have a background that is different than mine, that knowledge is an asset to our nation. And when they can share with us something that isn't working in their community, even if we haven't personally experienced it, we should be listening because it makes our entire nation stronger. So I don't care if you do it from a human perspective because you are a protector of people, or you do it from a readiness perspective. Either way, the right answer is to embrace our diversity and see it as the force multiplier that it is.
Yes, I agree 100%. I'm going to move on a little bit to the terrorist subject. I'd like to know, from your perspective, on how you think we could improve, or are we doing a fairly good job in let's say, controlling terrorism? And I don't mean globally, I mean mostly domestically, only because I cannot speak with any great authority about our foreign situation. We live in dangerous times in foreign lands, and I know that our young men in uniform are confronted with this every day. And
young
women.
men and women.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, Dad, I do have to correct those points.
Yeah, hey, let me assure you, I have no problem with being corrected on that issue whatsoever. The men and women in uniform are being exposed every day to some really terrible, awful things, and I think they deserve the recognition. But why don't you give me a little bit more on how you feel we're doing in both theaters, both domestic and foreign?
Yeah, so let's break it down. First, how are we doing in our nation? We live in a very safe nation, even given all the strife that's happening and the division, which does concern me greatly. Largely, we day to day live in a very safe nation compared to what other nations have to deal with. So we do have to start there and recognize that success and that peace. Secondly, when we do look at terrorism in the space that it exists, we do. You are very correct, Dad, that there is international terrorism and there is national terrorism, and I would actually add to that there is personal terrorism as well, because the definition of terrorism is control by fear. That fear can involve a weapon, but that fear can also involve control through emotional means. And so whether it is domestic violence that we're talking about, which is a form of terrorism, or it's national division, another form of terrorism, or it's international safety impact is a third form of terrorism. Now, international is interesting because, and we've talked about this a couple of times, it isn't just about coming in and taking out a country from a weapons perspective, meaning causing physical harm. If a nation can control the thought processes and actions of our people, they are still terrorizing us in some capacity. If we operate and make decisions as a nation based on fear, they are having the impact they are trying to have. And in many ways, it's less costly for them and it is more impactful. So you're going to see far more than what you see today. And it's going to become more sophisticated, more targeted, and more effective. So when I talked with our guest about cybersecurity, number one message that he gave, we need to educate everyone. And what does that mean? It means not just our military personnel that need to understand this. It's every single person in this country needs to understand how not only local people can take advantage of you, but that our international adversaries can infiltrate at the individual level. Dad, I'm getting a lot of feedback. Is that you? Do you mind muting when I talk and we'll flip it back and forth?
Yeah, I don't know. I have the AC on, so maybe I don't know.
That's what's doing it.
Is that better?
Yeah, that's perfect. Sorry.
No problem. I'm glad
you're in Florida, so I know that it is really tough. Good morning, Mary. Thanks for joining. So we have to look at terrorism across this entire spectrum, right? Taking care of our home, taking care of our nation, taking care of the international infiltration. Why is the international piece so important? Because the minute you can change warfare from being military to military and instead circumvent military to civilians, that's when you have a lot of power. Because other nations don't live by the ethics that we do, or some do. I mean, I don't mean to imply they all don't, but certainly some of our adversaries do not live by the ethics that we do. And therefore, they're able to combat individuals and terrorize people in a way that is very different. So it's layered and it's complicated. Getting it into 2 minutes, I think, is almost dangerous. But is the expectation these days, right? So if we were to layer this, number one, we have to better understand it. That means there does need to be more research in this area to understand, number one, who locally is going to be groups that are going to have mental health issues that could grow into home or national level terrorism. And then two, understanding how it maneuvers throughout the international space. So that's research. The second thing that we have to do is educate. We really do need to educate our entire nation. I don't want to scare people, but we do need to arm them with information. The assumption that physical weapons will keep you safe in this scenario is not accurate. And the minute someone controls your mind, well, they control quite a bit. And then the third thing that we need to do is really support people to understand these layers and recognize the benefits of diversity and bringing the different discussions to the table. So it's really an acknowledgement and discussion space, which, I don't know, I think people are uncomfortable talking about certain topics, so we avoid them. And
very definitely.
Very definitely. And diversity is one of those topics where, folks are having to yell loudly in order to be heard. And you can be upset and say, well, how come you're yelling more at me? But at the same time, we've not listened, and we need to be listening. So it's research, it's education, and it's collaboration and listening.
I think I'll take, and you just made me think about this, and that's where and you brought it up and you said it, but diversity truly adds to that third layer. I think as their experiences, their knowledge of their situations, and how they are going to be impacted by what's going to happen from an external, force is vitally important for survival. I think this is, and I hadn't thought of it in that fashion, but I'm glad you brought it up because I think it is actually as important as the number one, because we don't know what other things are going on unless we listen to diverse, opinions or diverse information or diverse people. We will never understand it because we're only going to be looking at it from one perspective if we don't, if we don't utilize that diversity to our advantage. So, great point right there. So,
I think we have to see the asset in this, and instead of I don't know, trying to get everybody to understand everybody else, that is a harder task. But we all have something to bring to the table, and we don't recognize that. We cut up our nose to spite our face.
Right, right. I agree. And that's a task and that's a long-term task. I don't want people to think that's going to happen within a short period of time. I mean, I want everyone to understand, and I know you're bringing this up constantly when in our discussions and different things, but the fact is everything that we do today is at least 2 to 3 decades long of learning and expanding on.
Yeah.
If you look at the youth of America today, every graduate from high school this year wasn't alive at 9/11.
Wow.
And
yeah, you're right. I didn't even think about that.
They weren't here. They have no idea what the impact of 9/11 really is. They've heard about it. It's no different than you and I knowing about the bombing, about the atomic bomb in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. They don't know about that. Matter of fact, there's so many that don't even realize what took place in the 60s as far as civil rights and also the movement against the war in Vietnam. Those were extraordinarily extreme, violent times. Probably some of the most violent domestically in our country we've ever seen. I mean,
Right.
outside of the Civil War. They were extraordinarily violent, and all you have to do is capture some of that on YouTube or wherever you want to go to do some research on it. So I think you've brought up, excellent points about that fear factor, and that's what terrorism is. I mean, it's literally, it's instilling fear, and if you don't do what I want you to do, there's a penalty for doing that.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you'd like to talk about regarding the psychology of that, or how
Sure.
cyber really turns into that?
Did you mean to walk me into this? I didn't know if you knew. I have a whole theory on terrorism.
It's my brilliance just shining through.
So think about terrorism like a virus, right? So we talk about a biological virus. We look for a patient zero, and then we look to see how it connects to other people and how it spreads out, right? And then watching how it spreads allows us to determine how to combat it, right? Because it allows us to anticipate symptoms and to be able to infiltrate from either a vaccination or an immediate reduction of contact. Now think about a computer virus, somewhat the same idea. Somewhere it originates, and then there is something that allows it to continue to expand, to get into the computer systems and move on. Same thing in a terrorism virus. So what actually happens in the brain is that you probably have almost a patient zero, somebody who is crazy, right? Their brain is not operating in a normal fashion. The chemicals aren't firing as they should. The brain is not processing information as it should, whether it's from trauma or it's organic, somewhat irrelevant. They're operating in a manner that is incredibly harmful to others. What is interesting, though, is how it connects and proliferates out to others, similar to a virus. So what you'll have in the next layer are people who are susceptible to these messages. And those people who are susceptible will get essentially a chemical rise. So some people will feel that when they go running or they jump off a cliff and do cave diving. And some people get it when they have these emotional messages, and it becomes almost a sport. Initially, it's exciting, so they keep coming back for it, because really what you're coming for is that biological, that chemical rush. But eventually, it actually changes what's called homeostasis, or the even point for the body. And you'll begin to feel uncomfortable unless you have that constant rise. And so now it becomes essentially almost a permanent change. And then it proliferates out to the next layer of people who maybe are less affected, but nonetheless still over years are indoctrinated. And then it works its way down, because if you're the child of one of these people, then you are also more susceptible, and you're getting this messaging every day. So in your development, your brain is actually developing. So what this allows us to do is figure out where are those target points that are truly problematic, and how does it spread? Once you understand that, you can actually reduce the aperture, how it maneuvers, and you can actually find the point where you really need to focus your military efforts. So by getting the right diagnosis, understanding the pathway of essentially what's a virus, you can actually combat it, anticipate it, and inoculate to it or come close to it much better. And I will say the number one way to do that really is through education. Is when people have an alternate understanding of the world, they're able to question the authority that is giving them that messaging. Not everybody, but it is the way that you start infiltrating that space. Does that make sense? I know that's a little complex. But...
No, it makes total sense. I think there's a reason we chose the word virus for even computer virus, because of what you just described. I mean, that is the typical.
The concept.
The concept is that it also fits into your thinking of the ecosystem.
Ecosystem, yeah.
And how our world is about an ecosystem doesn't mean it's just based on plant life or cell life. It's also based on the fact that we also have another ecosystem, which is basically cyber now, and we have to realize how that's utilized. And I think that's going to still be, that's going to be time incubated. The incubation time
there are incubation times, yeah.
Right, and this is happening. And I think your last discussion about AI, I think the things about teaching in the classroom was very interesting. I think it has it has a lot of basis for process and progress. However, I think, and I'm excited that they're taking the time to do it correctly. And I think that's the scientific method to do it that way. But the fact is, we can't rush into anything.
It's a little slower, but
and unfortunately, again,
right.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we're sitting down with it's no different than putting the CDC approving a drug, where it takes 10 years for a drug to get approved.
Yep.
This is going to take time to hatch, and as it's hatching, I think people have to understand that in that period of incubation, everything could change, and they almost have to take a right turn instead of taking the left turn that they thought they were going to take. So that's part of that incubation, to do it the correct way and see how we can do. But I'm excited. I think at least we're looking at it, and there's a lot of functionality going on in it. I think the education part. Education is such a challenge, because it doesn't just talk about opening up some book and memorizing things. And I think your discussions with the number of people in the past have been really extraordinary. But I also, the folks that we're having to reach also are struggling through their own personal life events and whatever. And if you include that in the learning process, or the learning disability, sometimes it's a real difficult thing. And sometimes that's where you were talking about people having problems absorbing and going through things.
So if I may comment on those 2 points. Number one, the education and some of the AI work, I will report, is going global. And we frequently refer to it as education for humanity. In other words, making sure that we are sharing what is available from an education perspective, and it's at no additional cost to taxpayers, generally speaking, because this is just a sharing of the information pipeline, and so that's why we really like the rinse, repeat, and share process. And the second thing I want to highlight is going back one step before that, is this notion that the next area of warfare is going to be psychological. And it is going to be in the digital space. And as we look to hire a commander-in-chief, it is paramount that we hire somebody that understands, not just has an expert that informs them, but understands how these 2 points affect the entire society, all people, civilians and military, and affects every part of our policy and our departments. It is not just DOD. Everyone, Department of Labor, Department of Justice, HUD, HHS, this kind of warfare can come through any of these means. So it is just as important that we understand mental health concerns through Health and Human Services as it is that DoD is making sure that we are combating terrorism and psychological warfare with the highest level of knowledge. Likewise, providing that support to our veterans, who I now say don't just risk life and limb, but it's life, limb, and mind. We have too many coming back with minds that have been compromised. This is hitting everyone. I cannot emphasize it enough, and it is a huge driving force for me to get into this arena, even though I'm not a politician, because I feel so strongly that the Commander-in-Chief needs to be an expert in this area and not one that is simply informed by someone else's opinion, because it connects across everything, infiltrates everything, and it matters for all policy decisions. Sorry, soapbox, but I needed to put it out there.
Oh, man, I'm glad you did, because I think that's that's the whole purpose of Ready Nation, period, across the board, and what you've been trying to say. And I'm glad you're saying it, because I wouldn't mind if every time we close, you use that closing, because I think it's so absolutely paramount. And I think I'll go one step further from the domestic side, is that our business community needs to tap into, buy into this, not tap in, but buy in to understanding on how their world is going to be severely impacted by this type of process. And it's going to come from both foreign and domestic situations.
Correct.
And the power it doesn't need to be a big entity like you brought up. A small country can be just as powerful as a large country in impacting what we do. So we need our corporations and our companies and stuff. And I think there's a seed there. And I think the youth and the diversity will start bringing that up through the ranks eventually, as guys of my age finally pass off into the never land, and we kind of get rid of some of these biases.
Dad.
Well, I'm not going anywhere for a while. I still got some. But I think old ideas die hard, and it's it's experience based. Blah blah blah. I could go on for days on that issue too. But the fact is, every transition, and that's why I talk about the time, how long it takes, what happens, and where it goes. We have to. This process, I think, is just is important to translate and push into the business community, so they understand what they're up against.
Absolutely.
Not what they have to, do, but they're going to be up against this every day in their life. I mean, this is going to be a profoundly dramatic hurt to them if they don't realize how it's going to impact them, whether it's with their employees, whatever. This is something they have to do. And our country was an economic country. That's what we do. We're a culture of, you can say, I'm going to use the word, we're a capitalist. That's what we do. So they have to understand that this is something that's going to shrink profits. It's going to take and manipulate their bottom line somewhere if they don't really address it and understand how to handle it. So I
do wish we could be a capitalist country with some humanity as well. I'd like to be both.
Well, yeah. Well, you have to. I mean, I think we're learning that. I don't think it's something that just came naturally. It's not a naturally occurring piece. Because we don't do it. This again is that experiment. It's never been part of the experiment. Now it's becoming part of the experiment, and we're recognizing it slow again. I think as the younger ideas come in, the more we talk about it and get it done, because we've got so much to share and so much to do, and everybody has a piece of that. And I think I think it's exciting, but I hope we continue, because I think that maturation will lend itself to even a much better place to live than it is even today. And
well, I'll take
that's my speech too.
The last statement. That's perfect, Dad. We will mature into the place we want to become. So excellent.
Yes.
Thanks, Dad, and take care of
All right,
thank
you.
And
I will.
We will check in.
She's better
next
today.
Week. I'm glad
She's
to hear
today.
it. Glad to hear it. All right, we'll talk to you soon.
Dear.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye.